Hi and welcome to the Financial Fox. I hope you are all well and keeping safe. In this episode, we will be talking about the green industrial revolution, which is at the top of government agendas around the world, but also is a key priority for any businesses. We will be discussing the changes unfolding in the energy sector, particularly in the UK, considering the transition to a low carbon economy, and also we will be talking about the UK energy mix. So how, for example, oil and gas industry and oil and companies are dealing with the imperative to be more sustainable and also resilient in this transition to low carbon emission. And we will be talking about the government investment. We will be talking about the role of technologies, which is also very important, and corporate individual responsibility to make this big change and this big transition that is going to be relevant for, not just for businesses, not just for us, but for all the planet. I will be joined by a panel of experts, two experts. One is a senior modeler from the award-winning energy consultancy firm Cornwall Insight, and then Zac Phillips, city analyst, working with different kind of independent energy company around the world. Let me introduce you to Tom Edwards and Zac Phillips. Hi guys, how are you?
Good, Very good, thanks Steph. Nice to join you.
Amazing. So today we will be talking about green industrial revolution, which everybody is talking about, particularly what's happened with the Prime Minister announcement last week in the UK. Maybe, Tom, would you like to introduce yourself? Because this is going to be a panel, a chat where, we are going to bring lots of things to the table. We are going to reflecting on, what is going on, and we are going to be analyzing different aspects to kind of come back to the point about UK energy transition, but also, UK energy security, which is very important. Yes, so Tom, if you would like maybe to introduce yourself and then maybe kind of pitch and what is this green industrial revolution? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm a senior modelling consultant at Cornwall Insight, which is a GB consulting firm specialising in energy in UK, Ireland and Australian markets. My day-to-day job is mostly about building models that look at how does the energy transition pan out, what does that mean for electricity prices, gas prices, hydrogen, how much offshore wind do we need to build, what's going on in interconnected markets, and how do you build that net zero system that supplies everybody with the energy they need. When I hear green industrial revolution, it sounds like the energy transition. It's about moving away from the kind of fossil fuel based energy system that we have now to a net zero system, which can still use fossil fuels, but we have to admit, we can't be emitting any additional carbon into the atmosphere. And primarily that means electrifying stuff, because the cheapest form of low carbon generation that we have available to us is renewable capacity, so onshore wind, offshore wind, solar panels. And that means we have to find ways of using that energy for all the other things that we use. So transport, heat are the two big ones, because they make up the majority of, especially in the UK where it's relatively cold, they make up the majority of the energy that we use every day. So finding ways to use that low carbon electricity and get it to people as well. So we know we can generate it. We have to find the best places, get enough capital to build those things. We then need to get it to the people who want to use it. And we have to schedule all sorts of resources. So the wires, transformers, substations, battery storage, so that when people want to use the energy, they can. And that on the flip side, when we're making lots of energy, because we don't have, when the sun is shining, when the wind is blowing, we don't have any control over that. It's just is happening. So we need to find ways of scheduling all of these new sources of demand and old sources of demand so that we can use these new resources in the best way possible. And I think that's what the green industrial revolution is really about, is about shifting our energy patterns and usage to account for these electrified sources of energy. And that's I'm ambivalent as to which exactly source it comes from. We're probably in the UK best off using wind because we have some of the best wind speeds in the world. But you know, solar is good, nuclear is good. We might be using hydrogen to transport things around, depending on exactly where and when that energy is created. And we are going to have to be just much smarter about the way our energy system, especially our electricity system, works. So we've got to schedule things in smarter ways, especially because electric vehicles, electric heating, they are much more energy intensive than electrical loads that we're used to. So a kettle in your home might be about 1 to 2 kilowatts, and you run it for maybe a couple of minutes. An electric car, if it was running at full, you know, if you're charging the battery from flat to full, you might be using 7 to 8 kilowatts for multiple hours. And that could severely stress the electricity system. So we need to be much, much smarter about the way we use these new resources. And that's part of the green industrial revolution. It's not just that we're changing, we also have to become smarter and take advantage of the digitalized, decentralized revolution that we've had in smart communication technology over the last 50 years.
Exactly. So bringing technology to, you know, to the energy mix. But you said obviously this is like a transition. So we are going from a current model that is based on different kind of energy sources to something that needs more work and needs some plan and need, as you said, smart thinking. Zac, you know, how do you see this happening? Because it can't happen from day one to day two. Out there are so many businesses, you know, they are providing lots of energy, they are providing petrol materials as well. So, you know, when people think about energy transition, they think that they think from day one, you go to one type of economy, the day after to another one. But this is not really the case. It takes decades, it takes a long time to, you know, to switch from a model to another. It might be just an integration of the both.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that's going to be a headwind to adopting any new energy sources is if people have to change the way that they use energy today. For example, load sharing and load shaving are things that people just won't accept in a modern day society. They want the energy when they want it, how they want it, for as long as they want it, and in what quantum they want it. We've been spoiled really in that we haven't had brownouts since the 70s in this country. Now California is experiencing a significant level of what they call brownouts, where there just isn't enough power in the system for people to gain access to it. And if that happens here in the UK, it will be a significant headwind. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that you know, we need to be smarter about how we manage what is at the end of the day a finite resource. But we also have to be quite cognizant of the fact that only 25% of the barrel goes into fuels. Now, what that means is that the remainder goes into everyday materials, whether it be a building block going into a specialist engineering composite, such as used in wind turbines, or a building block for a complex pharmaceutical active component. You know, there are lots of things that oil and gas goes into, and I think, you know, the need to focus on the transition is perhaps needs to be a little bit more, a little bit sharper, rather than this blunt application of oil bad, renewables good. So we need to understand each and every single lever that we're going to pull. And I think Tom hits the nail right on the head when he says that, you know, if we think we're going to do this overnight, we're very much mistaken, because our infrastructure is already near capacity. If we're going to take oil and gas out of the energy mix at the consumer level, and at the consumer level, I mean both in home and in transport fuels, then, you know, as Tom has very articulately expressed, you know, we need to upgrade our infrastructure, and that's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of energy.
And also it's going to take lots of money, because, you know, this transition is going to require lots of investment. Now, Tom, do you maybe want, you know, to give us an overview of, you know, the amount of money or the investment spectrum that has to be deployed here to actually make a change to the system?
Yeah, I mean, just for an idea, we're probably paying something like £7 to £8 billion a year for the current amount of support that we have for renewables on the system in GB alone, and that's getting us to regularly 20%, but in peak times about 45% of our mix coming from renewables. In order to then get the additional networks that we're going to need to move that around, you're talking additional billions of pounds a year to upgrade the transmission network. Multiply that by 14 probably for the distribution networks. That's not mentioning the amount of money we'll have to spend on EVs, heat pumps, and all the other kit that we're going to need. And we need to get to something like 80 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050. So that's, yeah, many multiples of billions of pounds, probably verging on capex. You're probably, by 2050, you're probably spending about £1,000 a kilowatt on an offshore wind farm just to build it. So it's a very expensive proposition. I think another good thing that you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned like the chemical products for oil and gas, because I think one of the key things about the green industrial revolution is we'll save a lot of oil and gas, because we won't be putting them through very inefficient engines to move people around, and we can concentrate and put that oil and gas in much more profitable, useful areas like plastics or other materials. So we should stop wasting it by throwing it away as heat in car engines. But yeah, the investment challenge is going to be really, really significant. And that's where, I think you mentioned a plan before. I think we've just had today, the government's announced some new rules for their upcoming auction, where they're going to double the target of offshore wind they want to buy and allow solar and onshore wind into the auction mechanism. And it's that's the kind of vision I think we need, in terms of, you know, we need to build this much by this time, and here is the cash for investors. We need to have the certainty that we're going to do this for the capital to come, because the traditional players in the energy market, the suppliers, the generators, don't have enough cash to do this on their own. We need to bring in capital from across the world to build this stuff, and we need to therefore make this an investable opportunity.
I think one of the things is also that most of the listed company, which is obviously a good way to get capital, they are oil and gas companies. So there are much less renewable or green energy company listed on the stock market, which is one of the best way to raise capital. It's not the only one, but most of these projects, they are private still.
Yeah, it's very risky it has been historically risky to build this infrastructure, because it's relatively new, and you're reliant on the government to pay you subsidies, because you until recently couldn't compete directly with the traditional forms of energy providers. So you had, I guess, a great example like Ørsted, Statkraft, big state-owned companies with, well, in the case of Ørsted, used to be Dong, had the experience of putting offshore things in place. Now they're the biggest offshore player in the world, and are actually more about offshore wind than they are about oil and natural gas. And I think that's one of the natural endpoints for Shell and BP if they wish to remain big, like the kind of big oil players. If they wish to remain energy players, are going to have to think about electricity, where they get their electricity from. whether or not that's signing corporate PPAs with developers of assets or actually developing their own assets, which now that the cost of these resources has fallen to the extent that they can compete with traditional forms of energy, it's just, a solar power plant is cheaper than a gas-fired power station to build. So if you need electricity, build solar panels.
I think it would be really good to just shed some light on the energy mix and, maybe go a little bit more in details or on wind projects, solar, just shed some light on that and maybe bring it also within the UK context as well.
Yeah, so the UK, as it stands, is a pretty much dual system. It's wind and gas. When it's windy, we use a lot of wind, but it's still probably never more than about 50%, and that would be overnight, would be coming from our wind resources, and then the majority of the rest of it will be coming from combined cycle gas turbines. We've also got nuclear, which sits at a kind of base load level and just pumps out a usually dependable level of power. There's solar, and we see in GB, we see the kind of duck curve effect where the demand shape drops in the middle of the day because there's lots of solar exporting onto the system, which you tend to see more in sunny countries like California, which was mentioned before. Australia is another great example where that happens. And the other big thing about GB is its interconnection. So we rely a lot on interconnection from other markets, and the key one is France. So France, because it has a lot of nuclear power stations, has very cheap power, and we tend to import power from them. And the other major factor is GB has a unilateral carbon tax that isn't present in any other market. So generally, because we have this unilateral tax, you make more money if you're a Dutch CCGT by exporting into GB than you do by running a gas-fired power station in GB. And as we go forward, the key trends there will be more wind, more solar, more interconnection. So we are one of the windiest countries in the world. We have relatively shallow seabeds, so we are going to build a lot of offshore wind. And we've seen in the most recent auctions that is now cost comparable with big gas-fired power stations. So it's likely that we'll continue to develop that. And it doesn't have a lot of the attendant political problems that come with onshore wind, being that people object to it less because you see it less. So we'll probably be using a lot more wind. So our system will become more and more wind dominated. And the other factor is, the Committee on Climate Change and National Grid agree that about 60 to 80 gigawatts of that final capacity that we'll have in 2050 will be offshore wind. So for reference, the total capacity connected to the GB system at the moment is about 100 odd gigawatts. So we're talking about most of the capacity on the system being offshore wind. We'll probably have something like 200 gigawatts of total capacity by 2050. And a lot of that will be offshore wind, a lot of it will be onshore wind. We'll also have lots of backup in the form of lithium-ion batteries. So the electric vehicle revolution has been great for the energy transition and electricity industry in general, because the more of those electric vehicles you manufacture, the cheaper the battery packs get, the cheaper it is to deploy standalone applications. And those sites can store energy for short periods of time and help balance out the load on the system. So we'll be building a lot more of those. And the other thing is we'll probably have about 30 gigawatts of interconnection. So currently there's 5 gigawatts of cables that link us to the continent and to Ireland. And it's likely that in the 2050s, we'll be looking at about 30 gigawatts of cables. So we'll be much more interconnected with the rest of the European network than we are now, despite Brexit, because fundamentally, even if we're not part of the European Union, even if we're not part of the internal energy market, we are going to need their power. They are going to need ours. So if we have 80 gigawatts of offshore wind, it's likely we'll be exporting overnight when, say, French solar or Spanish solar or Italian solar is not generating. And they will want our power. And then in the middle of the day, perhaps if it's not very windy, we'll want their power. So despite Brexit, we're going to have lots of interconnectors, because relying on those much more variable power sources means that every country across the continent is just going to become much more reliant on its neighbours. Because say it's cloudy in Germany, it might still be bright in France, and there's weather patterns roll across the continent. Power traders already trade weather fronts as they roll across the continental system, and that's just going to become more prevalent. You've also got, say, Norway is a big hydro battery. We can generate wind power here, ship it off to Norway, they pump the water up the hill, and then when the wind dies down here, the water drops down the hill and they send the power back to us. So yeah, in the future, lots more domination by renewables, lots more interconnection. We're going to have to be much more flexible. So I mentioned before being smart about things. Consumers, although they might want to turn, say, I come back home, I plug my electric car in, I expect it to be charged. In reality, we're going to intermediate that relationship. Computers will sit in between me turning my car on and the car actually charging. And it will make a decision based on the price of electricity, the availability of electrical resources about whether or not to charge that car, because it won't take the full 8 hours or however long it is between the end of my commute and the start of my next commute to charge my car up back to full. The computer inside the vehicle will likely make that decision about when is the best time to charge. So even though I flick the switch, there's going to be something sitting in between my human desire and the actual physical network that makes that decision. And we'll have to make that, there'll have to be some sort of policy decision on behalf of the government to make some sort of arrangement about how essential loads, say cooking versus charging your car, are allocated on the system. Because at 6:30, when everyone wants to cook, we can't have everyone turning their electric vehicles on. So it's likely that some form of computer program will sit in between those decisions and mediate the relationship on the grid so that we don't overload all of our substations, basically.
But also optimize, because I think you raise a great point. I mean, if I'm putting my phone or my computer on charge, it's not yes to stay on charge for like 12 hours. In 1 hour is already charged. So this is all kind of energy that is going to be wasted, basically. So yeah, I think that was a good point. But something else you mentioned is about security. And here in the UK, we still have a vibrant oil and gas industry with little project they are still not developed. So Zac, maybe do you want to step in and just talk a little bit about how oil and gas companies, or let's call it traditional energy company, are basically dealing with this imperative to be more resilient and sustainable in this transition, but also contribute to the energy mix in order to reach an energy security that can be good for the country, and as you said, Tom, also for the for the interconnection that we are going to develop.
Yeah, I think inevitably domestic producers, wherever the domestic domain is, whether it's the United States, the United Kingdom, France, or wherever, they're part of the energy mix, and it's always going to be that way. I think the one area where perhaps I differ quite strongly from Tom is the fact that I don't believe that there will ever be an accepted load balancing dependent on what you're using. I think this is one of the things that I spoke about in it being a headwind to people accepting renewable energy. And I think this is where the if you like, the legacy generation businesses are perhaps going to fit in, rather than load saving at the consumer end. It's actually going to be feeding rationing at the producer end. So for example, where we have let's say that the interconnectors are at full capacity, the wind speeds are starting to decline, and we're getting a nice still day. We're not going to be telling everybody that, oh no, you can't use that much energy in this particular application because we say so. What's going to happen is it's going to be the gas turbines, which have very, very short turnarounds. You can spool them up within half an hour and get them synchronized with the grid. That's when you will see those distributed power stations actually starting to kick in. And in that respect, we'll have load shaving from stored energy, whether it be hydro or batteries. But that's where the current oil and gas infrastructure is going to be able, in the new energy economy, to ensure that people's not only lifestyles but quality of life is maintained. And that's been the great equalizer, I think, from if you like, the old economy to this new economy, is that by and large hydrocarbons are portable, scalable, and accessible immediately. And I think that's going to be its very trait that's going to empower and allow the green revolution to take place, because the need for renewables to provide consistent power can be allowed to melt away, because we have these load sharing and load shaving alternatives in the shape of oil and gas. And I think,
on that point, Zac, we do have here in the UK some good oil and gas project. They still have to develop. They are they are in a phase of development, and they actually contribute a lot to the country.
They do, but here again, we're sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and the existing oil and gas resources, even onshore UK, are an essential part to allowing the wider dependence on renewables to happen. Because I can tell you right now, and I will bet pounds for pennies, that if there's a rolling brownout and it's so severe that even hospitals suffer from rolling brownouts, that will be the start of the tide turning against renewables, and it will be inexorable. It won't be able to be stopped. There'll be no government that will be able to stop it. No, Greenpeace won't be able to stop it. Nobody will be able to stop it, because it will be the will of the people. And I think this is where having just accepting that renewables do have cyclicality to the way that they're able to deliver is absolutely fine. Let's increase the volume of those renewables, and then let's properly design that system. I think, as Tom has perfectly articulated, I think for a slightly different reason. Tom thinks it's going to be rationing it at the household level. I think it's going to be managing those peak supplies to make sure that cyclicality in demand and cyclicality in production are kept nice and smooth. And that way, people won't care where the electron actually comes from when it comes out of their plug, but they will care if it's not coming out of their plug, because the renewables mandate has been pushed so far that it's been to the expense of providing that backup power. And I think this is where we need to have perhaps an open and honest and frank conversation about where the individual parts all fit together within the scope of one piece to provide continuity of power.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Tom, what are your thoughts? So then we can wrap this discussion up.
I think that fossil fuels will remain important for probably at least 2 decades. So out to the 2040s, because again, there just isn't anything at the scale that can replace gas in the system. But I think that by the time you're getting into the 2050s,
if we are still going to be here,
yeah, if we're still here,
exactly.
I think that the the fossil fuels will have been pushed so far to the margin that they are just treated as that kind of, they're a bit of an asset that sits at the back. There's a tank of oil on it. We kind of forget about it, but bung it some money every now and then just to make sure it's there. But most of the time we'll be using renewables. We'll be using battery storage, pump storage, or hydrogen. And I think that there's maybe a lot of those current thermal generators could convert to hydrogen. It is physically possible. It has been trialed. Where current CCGTs have been burning hydrogen instead of gas. So that might be the kind of glide path. You know, we keep burning ever lower volumes of gas to keep the system on as we increase the level of renewables. And then eventually, because we will just have to stop burning gas in power stations that isn't captured or abated. That's another option, is we could just abate it at the end. It'll have to turn into hydrogen. So we either have to capture it as it comes out at the end, or before it goes into the turbine. But yeah, those turbines will be sitting there. It's just they'll run very, very infrequently.
Yeah, well, for now, it's still a big plan, and it's a plan that needs a different kind of element to work together. As we said, transition, it can't happen from day one to day two, and even from year one to year two. It takes time, and I think it's important that governments and people, they all contribute to this big plan of energy transition, as both of you said. You know, it's going to be an interesting space to watch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for joining.
Great, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
This is everything from the Financial Fox, and thank you very much for watching. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter to keep up to date with our interviews and with our news. See you next time.